Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to another presentation in the program series here at All Saints called Understanding Ourselves and Others. Today's program is sponsored by the Living Our Values Commission, and it will focus mostly on the 1950s restoration of All Saints Church and the members and the community at large in Calvert County coming together to save it. We also will include information of the time preceding the restoration when All Saints was in decline in the 1940s, and after the restoration during the 1960s, and look at the impact that saving All Saints had both on the members and the community at large. Members of the Living Our Values Commission will present each segment. Cindy Overstrom, the 1940s, Martha Hyde, the 1950s, and Joe Klausner, the 1960s. Most of the information that we have was gleaned from Edward J. Dykeman's 1692 to 1992 All Saints history. Some of it comes directly from it. If you wish, you can request a copy of this history from our church office. Much of his information was compiled from the following sources: the Reverend Chesley V. Daniel, rector of All Saints from 1962 through 1992. Mrs. Verda Turner, a member of the parish for 65 years. Mrs. Eleanor Marquis, also a long-term member. As well as written histories from Mrs. Helen Jarvis, Mr. Robert King, and Mr. Troy Smith. And information from Mr. F. Garner Ronnie, historiographer for the Diocese of Maryland. You'll also hear testimonies from current members who were at All Saints at the time: Catherine Grover, Gordon Graham, and Martha Graham, who described the church during each of the periods presented. After the presentation of each segment, you'll also hear a hymn that may have been sung at All Saints during that time period. Following the presentation, we'll have time for discussion, and we encourage you, the audience, to participate. You may want to prepare for the discussion by jotting down your insights and comments, and we would like the discussion to focus on such themes as why this small group of members decided to save All Saints instead of attending other churches in the area. And as well, how was it accomplished? What was the impact, especially on the members and the community at large? And what can we learn from those who saved All Saints that pertains to our situation today? I believe that's very important that we look at that and try to discern from that. And we're very pleased to welcome Sherry Tardio from the Community Mediation Center of Calvert County, who will facilitate our discussion following the presentation. We hope you enjoy our program, and we're very happy that you are participating. And now we begin with a description and testimony of what it was like to worship at All Saints in the 1940s. Cindy?
We will begin with the description of life in Calvert County during the 1940s. It was much different then than it is today. Calvert was a small, rural community. People had to work hard on their farms all day. They produced their own foods and many supplies. There was little reason to leave the farm except for visiting, but many people went to worship every Sunday at their town church. The church was not just a place for worship, but a weekly social connection as well. Everyone would catch up with each other's lives. Parishioners asked one another, "How are your crops? Who's getting married? Who is ill? What do you need?" Some members even met their spouses attending church. So town churches were very important to their lives, but by the 1940s, the All Saints parishioners were struggling to keep their church open. Mr. Dykeman's history stated that from 1929 through much of 1940, All Saints Parish was without a rector because the size of the congregation did not justify a resident clergy. During this period, many families were moving out of this part of Calvert County, and replacements did not keep up with the migration. The parish weekend, however, services continued every Sunday. All Saints was attached to St. James Lothian and St. Paul's Prince Frederick, but received little clerical attention. Starting in 1930, the parish was in the charge of a lay reader who conducted an 11 a.m. Sunday service. One Sunday a month, he would bring a minister from Annapolis to celebrate communion. In January 1939, the Women's Guild met jointly with the vestry. They met to hear a member's report on his visit to the bishop concerning their need for a priest in charge at All Saints. The Reverend David C. Watson assumed the duties as rector in late 1940. In early 1945, the Reverend Malcolm Langley became rector. There was no Sunday school, and the 11 a.m. service was discontinued, but a 3 p.m. service was held on Sundays. In the summer months, Sunday services were held at 7:30 p.m. Usually there were about 15 persons attending services, but only half of them at any one service. The rector of All Saints in the 1940s was required to share his duties between All Saints and St. James parishes. In 1949, after a dispute with the vestry of St. James, the Reverend Langley resigned. This left All Saints without a rector. Beginning Easter Sunday, the Reverend Herschel Calvert, serving as rector of St. Paul's and Christ Church, also held services at All Saints in between services at the other churches. All Saints Parish was rapidly failing, and many people had lost interest who were attending other churches which had Sunday school. Mr. Dykeman's history described the building at this time. The church building was run over with ivy and poison oak, which had grown through the shutters in the balcony area and pushed out window panes and grown through window sills. Ivy growing on the crevices of bricks had dislodged a number of them. The shutters on the ground floor were the only ones that opened. Pews were neither under the gallery on the south nor the north side at either end of the church, except for one built into the wall on each side. Termites had eaten the floor and side wood paneling so extensively that the north side under the gallery had to be closed. In addition to the church falling into a state of disrepair, cattle were also known to graze in the churchyard, threatening grave sites. The Reverend Calvert advised the parish members to ask the bishop to send the Reverend John E. Owens, chaplain at St. James School for Boys, Hagerstown, Maryland, to All Saints for the summer months during his school vacation. Bishop Powell agreed, and in June 1949, he sent Father Owens to study and report back to him at the end of the summer about the condition of the parish. Bishop Powell instructed him to consider whether All Saints should be closed, because it was the bishop's opinion that it should be. That, of course, did not sit well with the congregation. Perhaps the reason that Bishop Powell agreed to send Father Owens to lead worship during that summer was because Father Owens was raised in the city, had no family ties at that time, and would probably be ready to leave the rural community and return to teaching in the fall. But as we found out later, this did not happen. Now you will hear an audio testimony by Mrs. Catherine Grover, who was born and raised at All Saints through the 1940s. During this audio, you will see pictures of Mrs. Grover, her parents, a wedding picture of Mrs. Grover's sister Emily, born Hyde, and a photo of the outside of All Saints before it was restored. After that, you will hear the hymn, In the Garden.
We're here with Catherine Bourne Grover who was born and raised and attending All Saints Episcopal Church in Sunderland, Maryland. She was born in 1927 and continued to worship at All Saints till she left home in 1944 to go away to school. So, Aunt Catherine, can you tell us about your family history at All Saints Church, your ancestor? And I think we're talking about your ancestor was Edward Gant, who was one of the vestrymen who signed the mortgage to build the current church. And I believe that the farm that you grew up on was part of his ancestral farm. Can you also tell us a story about how your parents met at All Saints?
My mother answered an ad for a bookkeeper for Mr. Goldstein, who had a department store in Prince Frederick. She boarded, when she went to Prince Frederick, she boarded with the minister and his family. The minister was the pastor at All Saints Church, and he took my mother with him when he went to service. And when he found out that she could play the organ, he prevailed upon her to play the organ for the church, which she did regularly. One Sunday, one of the families, the Bourne family, invited her to come home with them for dinner, to which she replied, "I have no way of getting back to Prince Frederick." So the quick answer by one of his sisters, Betty, was that, "Oh, my brother will take you back." And that was the beginning of a courtship.
And as I say, the rest is history. Do you remember getting confirmed?
Yes, we went to St. James Church in Lothian for confirmation because it was just the two of us, my sister Emily and me.
So you went with a kind of a county or a Southern Maryland kind of church.
I think there was only All Saints and St. James.
And St. James. I know I've heard too at some point you worshipped at St. James some Sundays as well. Was there a time when the membership got so low that you shared a priest with St. James?
No, I don't remember.
Don't remember. I don't know if I had heard that.
I don't know where our priest came from, but we did not share a service.
Okay. So you always had your own service at All Saints?
Yes.
Do you remember the number of members before you went away to school? Was it a small congregation? Were there many young people?
No, there were not many young people. And I couldn't put a number on the congregation, but it was, say, 20-some maybe.
Okay. Do you remember some of the families' names when you were growing up that worshipped during that time?
Well, there were the Dowells, Russells, Blakes.
Blakes,
That's all I can recall at the moment.
And I know that, of course, those names are families that still, their descendants are still live in Calvert County, and the Dows, one of their descendants, Brian, still worships at All Saints. Do you remember any special hymns or favorite church hymns of maybe your parents or you in the church? Did your mother have any? I know that she played the piano and she played the organ at the church too. Did she have any favorite hymns that you remember growing up?
No, I don't remember.
Tom, you want to add to that? Because you said you remember your grandmother had some favorite hymns that she liked to play.
One of them was the song "In the Garden." I know that we spent summers with her, and she played the piano every day. And I know they were all church songs, but I don't remember any other in particular.
Okay. Now, Aunt Catherine, I also want to ask you if you can remember, especially the time right before you left to go away from home to go to school in 1944. Do you remember what the church looked like inside or out, or the grounds or the cemetery? Do you remember any summer suppers? Did the church women put on the lawn summer supper when you were growing up?
Oh, yes, I remember the Sunday suppers.
Mm-hmm. And they were held out on the lawn. I remember them as well when we moved up.
North side of the church.
The north side of the church.
And they were well attended.
From people all around from the county. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and was it held in August every year? Do you remember?
I think it was hot weather.
It was hot weather. Well, Tom, maybe you can tell the story about the condition of the inside of the church when your mother got married, because you heard that story numerous times growing up.
I heard it was a wooden floor, and my grandfather had to patch some holes in it so that the wedding party could walk up the aisle. And, that's was prior to the masonry floor that's there now.
And I think we also heard that they had to be careful where they sat the guests, because some of the balconies, the supports in the front were starting to fall, so they had to be careful and not set guests or members in certain areas underneath the balconies of certain parts of the church.
I never heard that.
So one last question, now that moving on to the actual restoration, do you remember the first time you met Father John Owens, who played a big part in keeping the church open and kind of rallying the families in the community to restore it? Do you remember the first time you met him?
No, I don't. I've been trying to think of that. But I know when I finally did meet him, whenever it was, I was impressed by his personality.
How would you describe his personality?
Outgoing, friendly, competent.
I've heard that by quite a few people. He married Tom's parents, meaning he did the celebration. No, he never married, but his life was, he was a teacher, and he went, after he left All Saints, he went to be headmaster at St. James Episcopal, boys' school in Hagerstown. And he was teacher, headmaster the rest of his life. So his life was students. So he never married. Maybe we can also talk about that you did come back to become a member of All Saints in your later years. You settled back on the family farm. What year would that have been? Do you remember, Tom, when your aunt moved back to the farm? 19?
You mean like 10 years ago?
It was about 10 years ago.
Well, it was after Dad passed away, and that was 2009, so am I thinking right?
It was about 2010.
That would seem about right.
I think,
Was there anything when you came back in 2010 that stood out to you that something had changed a lot, either in the worship service or the building? Was there anything that when you first came back 10 years ago after
more bigger congregation?
Okay, so certainly a bigger congregation than what you grew up with.
And I don't remember who was the priest.
Would have been Father Ken.
It was probably Father Ken when you first came back. Okay, well, Aunt Catherine, thank you so much on behalf of all of the members of All Saints. They were very interested in your story and your memories. And again, we can always add to that.
I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God disclosing, and He
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Martha Graham Hyde, and my family has been longtime members of All Saints, and I grew up in All Saints Church as well. And today, I am also a member of the Love Commission, and today I will be telling you about the 1950s restoration and the saving of All Saints Church during that time period. So I'm going to begin with telling you about restoring the membership. According to Mr. Dykeman's history, beginning in the summer of 1949, Father Owens devoted all of his time to All Saints Church, and members of the parish were quite pleased with the work he was doing. Father Owens proved to be the leader the congregation needed. The ivy and poison oak were removed from outside of the church building, the shutters were reopened, and the churchyard was cleaned and the grass mowed, even sometimes by Father Owens. He changed Sunday services to 7:30 and 11 o'clock a.m., and he made visits to individual members trying to renew their interest in the church, and the congregation started to increase. A parishioner recalled that there was a lunchroom right across from the church called Stennett's. It was a local hub of the town where many residents went to lunch every day. Father Owens also went to lunch there most days, and it was recalled that he would even invite everyone he saw there to come worship across the street on Sundays. Before the summer was over, the vestry and the congregation, seeing the change that had taken place at All Saints, wrote the bishop to ask permission to call Father Owens as their full-time rector and not associate it with any other parish. The bishop's response was that he still thought the church should be closed, and well, where was All Saints members going to get the $2,000 to pay Father Owens' salary? A congregational meeting was soon held, and vocal pledges were made to cover expenses. Within 1 week, a rector's fund was formed comprised of members. In an August 31st, 1949 letter to the All Saints vestry, the committee wrote that they had made a speedy campaign to raise the funds for the salary of Father Owens for the year beginning September 15th. They also reported that they already had pledges for $2,000 and plus. The committee's efforts to raise the full amount was eventually successful, and the bishop was notified. The bishop agreed, and Father Owens was called, and he subsequently accepted on the condition that he could delay his coming as full-time rector until June, the end of his school term obligations. But during that year, Father Owens still commuted on weekends between St. James School and All Saints Church. Now, restoring the building, raising the funds. A drive to raise $40,000 to rehabilitate All Saints Church got underway right away. The farmers were asked to donate a basket of their own top quality tobacco leaf called the Bright. Donated tobacco was auctioned off at the local tobacco warehouse around June 15th, the same month that Father Owens arrived in 1950 to assume full-time rectorship. The congregation undertook a complete restoration of the church, and fundraising continued. Funds were continued to be raised through solicitation of money, tobacco, or anything that had any monetary value. Even timber on property that the church owned was evaluated for cutting to secure more funds. The families of those buried at All Saints Cemetery were also contacted, and as a result, money for restoration was received from those across the United States. The Ladies' Guild was constantly engaged in efforts to raise money, including funds raised from their annual summer suppers on the lawn. Now, summer suppers were another way the community and members came together with each other, supporting each other's suppers. And the Guild made a $1,000 pledge as well to the Restoration Fund. Now, according to longtime member Gordon Graham, who was a close friend of Father Owens, Father Owens also galvanized the entire community by soliciting donations from everyone he met throughout the county. He resided at a Prince Frederick boarding house operated by a very social widow who always had guests from across the county come visit. Father Owens would always explain to her guests about the All Saints Restoration Project and the need for donations. He even secured donations from the widow and her family as well. After having raised $20,000, actual plans were started. On July 11, 1950, a contract was signed with the diocesan architect who was to supervise the project. A contractor in Prince Frederick who specialized in restoration work was also hired on a cost-plus basis, but not to exceed a certain cost. He was the only contractor who would take on these terms, and again, showing a member of the community that was willing to help with this project. The balance required to complete this project was borrowed from a local bank, now known as Maryland National Bank. The bank, though, would not accept a mortgage on the property, so notes were signed by individual members for either $500 or $1,000. Restoration. When the restoration began, services were held under the oaks in front of the church during the summer months, or at the former Shiloh Church in Dunkirk, where you can still find its cemetery in front of the Safeway Shopping Center. So, what did the church members and the community come together and restore? Some of the restoration included the church's main and gallery wood ceilings were removed and roof supports were reinforced. The brick walls and arches were repaired to match the building. The church was also completely torn out on the inside. The pews, paneling, and galleries were photographed, cataloged, and numbered to be reused where possible. All wood flooring and supports were removed, the latter replaced with termite-proof 20-ounce copper shoe shields and concrete footings. All doors and windows were caulked and painted inside and outside, including the shutters. The 4 chimneys were removed for the wood stoves, and radiant heating pipes were installed in a new concrete floor. A new heating plant and electrical wiring outlets and new lighting fixtures were installed. A 7.5-inch square brick tile floor was installed, and all undamaged pews were reinstalled, and others were replaced with copies crafted by hand. The chancel was also enlarged, and a new altar rail was installed, patterned after the one removed. The 1735 font, the only original item found in the first log All Saints Church, was finally moved from the west end to the east end, which for 95 years had been considered the proper location. In order to complete the work, another $10,000 had to be borrowed from the bank. Nearing the end of this monumental restoration project, the congregation once again found the need to raise additional funds to complete the project. They had to decide then whether to complete the project or stop. They also had to raise an additional $6,000 for the rector's salary and repaying the loans. But the congregation once again decided to persevere, and the projects were completed and the salary was raised. They had 28 pledges that year. Fittingly, on All Saints' Day, November 1st, 1952, the reopening of All Saints Church was celebrated. After the first hymn, Bishop Powell knocked 3 times on the church door saying, "Open me the gate of righteousness, that I may go into them and give thanks to the Lord." The congregation then responded, "This is the gate of the Lord, and the righteous shall enter into it." Now, to learn more about Father Owens and the restoration, you will see a video testimony from Gordon Graham, a longtime member who was friends with Father Owens during the restoration. Although we cannot find a record of what hymn was sung by the congregation on the day of the reopening celebration, you will, though, listen to an Episcopal hymn from that time period titled for all of the saints.
Okay, my name is Martha Graham Hyde, and I'm here with my husband, Thomas John Hyde, and we are here visiting my father, Malcolm Gordon Graham, Jr. And we are here at his family ancestral farm called Springfield. And I'm here today to talk with my dad about what he remembers about All Saints Church, and also the restoration. My dad was born in Baltimore, and he moved around quite a bit when he was growing up. But when he inherited the farm, he spent a lot of summers up here first. And so his family goes way back at All Saints Church. So,
What do you remember about the late 1940s, early 1950s restoration of All Saints?
I remember, of course, I wasn't here much at that time, but I remember when they took all the pews out, smashed them outside, and had plastic covering them up. And they just about gutted the church to get rid of all the termites.
yeah. Well, go ahead.
So,
Back to Father Owens. I don't mean to interrupt you again, but one of my first questions for you, because you are one of the few that can tell us about Father Owens. Do you remember the first time you met him? I mean, you knew him in the summers when you would come up to check on your property. Right. Do you remember the first time you were introduced to him? I know that's a long time
it would
ago.
be in probably 52, 53. Father Owens was in the military, like same size during World War II, same I was. And as I remember, I think he was a captain in it. Then he went into seminary and became a priest. And the diocese sent him down here to close the church up because there was only about 10 people at the most in it. And at that time, if you wanted to go to church, you went up to St. James at 3 o'clock. Well, so many of the parishioners that were in it, and all the people around Lower Marlborough, the old farmers and everything, at one time all belonged to All Saints. Well, then they drifted to the Methodist Church. So when he came down, the Dowells were about the only ones there. Lived across the street from the church. And so he came, the diocese sent him down here to close the church up. He came down here and stayed with, where I was in Prince Frederick with a cousin of mine. And of course they took him all around to the parties and everything else. He met all those people down there, plus the people up here. And he kind of fell in love with his church. It was a nice building and everything. So when he got out of seminary, usually they sent him to his assistant. Well, he was used to giving orders, not taking orders. He was in his 30s, and he saw a chance to have his own church. So he asked the diocese if they'd give him a year if he could save it. Well, he came down here and went around to all the people, that few people that were here, plus the ones that used to be, and they borrowed money from the diocese and the banks to remodel the church. Well, you know, banks don't like loaning money to churches. It's not good publicity to kick somebody out. Anyhow, I have an idea the interest probably was 3 or 4% on that. And then people came to my cousin who didn't belong to the church, but his family had originally Briscoes. And so he signed up with a lot of the others how much they would be responsible for their debt. And I think he signed up for about $5,000, which was a lot of money back then. if the church couldn't pay the debt, they were responsible for it. And plus, Father Owens went around to people and told them, I'm going to be the priest there, and I run a different kind of service than what y'all have been used to. He says, I'm high service. Well, I couldn't see where high. He did use bells and a few other things in it. And he wrote to people like DuPont, who donate a lot of money to Williamsburg and places like that to save them old historical things. And he got donations from them. The parishioners also donated a burden of tobacco, which is about 200 pounds, to the church every year. And I don't know whether some of them donated tips with the cheapest kind or what, but they did donate a burden every year, and that was about $200 they donated, which is a lot of money for the farmer to give up. Some years they made good money on tobacco, some years they didn't. But anyhow, he got a contractor in, and they dismantled the church, replaced practically everything. And the church used to have blinds, like it does now. It has blinds now, don't it?
You mean shutters?
Yeah, shutters. And when they took them down, there was flying squirrels' nests behind them. And Lord knows what else had been in the church one time. So he saved the church. If it wasn't for him, there wouldn't have been any church. And I remember coming up here in the summer, and there was probably maybe 20 people in it. And they'd get some new people come in, but they were military people, and they weren't going to be there very long.
Do you remember, again, any of those names that when you would come up in the summertime in the 50s and come to church, do you remember the names of those families? Of course, we know that Tom's grandparents, Tom and Edna Bourne, were members. Do you remember any of the other, Tawny Gibson, is that? The Blakes, they were?
Yes.
Of course, the Dows.
Enid Blake, and Mary.
Mary, and the Dows again.
And the Dows. And I remember Bourne with his sister coming there.
Okay, Bourne House.
And his mother, his father.
His father,
came.
Milton.
And basically, that was all the families I remember.
Well, let's go back again to that time period of the Restoration. And I think, again, because you're one of the few that can speak about Father Owens again, and we touched a little bit about how you knew him and how you got to know him so well, because the summers when you would come up, you would live in the same, and it was a boarding house then,
right? And
you would live in the same boarding house with him in Prince Frederick, and I can't think of the name of it's a restaurant now, but it used to be called Oldfield Inn. And again, your cousin, Betty Briscoe, was a widow, and she ran the boarding house. So for those few summers when the Restoration was taking place and you would come up, you would literally have dinner, right, and breakfast with Father Owens?
Breakfast, as I remember, he didn't eat breakfast. He came down and had communion first. Gave himself communion.
So you got to know him really well.
Yeah, he used to play a piano at night.
And did I hear that he cut the grass at All Saints too?
He and Marvin Stinnett had the restaurant down the road.
And he would have, from what I also heard, he was a real people person of the community too. There was that lunch house right across the road from All Saints, and he would have lunch there.
Right.
So he got to know the members of the community surrounding the church. And you said that he would invite everyone that he got to meet come to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, back to Father Owens again. So,
He played the piano, and he played this one piece specially, Cavaliere Rusticana, I think they called it. And it was the prettiest sounding thing. And I asked him one time, I said, "Are you a good preacher?" He said, "No, I'm a teacher, not a preacher," which he eventually got a job at the Episcopal schools, running it. But he was a tall, good-looking man.
he was such a impressive person. Some people that I've talked to describe that when he walked into a room, he was just, you wanted to know who he was.
He was
He was tall and he made a big impression. He's very formidable. Now, let's go back to, because that was another one of my questions. So after the restoration, another question was, do you know where the church members met while the restoration was taking place and the church was, what was it, about 2 years the church was closed?
A little church up at Dunkirk, Shiloh. And it was the prettiest little church, I suspect. It was a Southern Methodist church during the Civil War. And it was a pretty little church, gone now. But that's where we met. And I don't think they had any stained glass windows. You could see out around the church and everything right off of Route 4. And I liked it.
Actually, the cemetery is still there, and there is a permanent historical religious marker. And if you're interested, you can find that where it is in front of Safeway Shopping Center in Dunkirk to the right, and it's next to the dental old-looking office building. And there is a marker, and the cemetery there, it's still there. And again, it was Shiloh Church. So another couple questions before we finish. We talked about Father Owens quite a bit.
We've got a long way to go.
And we have a long way to go about the restoration. Let me finish my questions and then you can add. And we answered how the restoration was paid for. We mentioned some of the names of the members that were instrumental in the restoration. We mentioned where the congregation worshiped. We've described the church interior and exterior. And we talked again about why the bishop was deciding to close the church. Back to Father Owens. Let's go back to him one more time. So do you remember or know how long did he stay after the church was reopened? Was it a year before he?
At least a year.
Okay.
Two probably. And then Flattermash took over.
Okay. And then why and where did Father Owens go after he left?
Went to St. James Episcopal School for boys.
And that's in Hagerstown, and I think it's still there, an Episcopal school. Can you explain, because I'm sure because how well you knew him, and you think you've already mentioned that in the interview, but why did he leave the priesthood and go to be a teacher? And
well, he was still a priesthood. He was the head of the school. And he was still a priest. He used to come down here once in a while and see how we were doing. And he was still a priest. I don't think he ever really quit.
but I guess my reference was more to, instead of leading worship at a church, he chose to be on the teaching end. And
Right.
he said to you,
Yeah, he no doubt had church services there.
but he was a teacher. He preferred teaching.
Preferred the teaching end of it. And, he, like I say, he met all these people in the lower part of the county when he lived there. And down there, they had parties every time you turned around. And he'd go to them. He learned all those people all the way down to Solomon. And he would have maybe one drink at the party. That was all. But he had a good personality. Everybody liked him.
You share with a lot of memories that only you know, so they're very valuable, and I know the other members will appreciate you sharing them and just saving them for other members to come later. So having said that, thank you again, Dad. And if you want to wave goodbye again from Springfield Farm and Owings.
One in church.
And I think I failed at the beginning to say what today's date is. So we're here on Springfield Farm, July 14th, 2021.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Joe Klausner. I've been coming to All Saints since about 2014. What brought me to All Saints back in 2014, 2015 was a program called Honest to God that Father Ken had developed. I found it fascinating, and I would just come to those meetings on Sundays and attend the Honest to God sessions. And what was great about it was he would bring in a rabbi one week, he would bring in somebody to discuss the Quran, and it was just eye-opening for me to be able to learn more about the Bible and about religion. Subsequently, I started attending the services more, and I've been with the choir ever since. Really appreciate the opportunity to play with the choir because it gives me the opportunity to play in this grand church and play my fiddle and mandolin, and it just rings. So really, really appreciate that. I'm also a member of the Love Sea Commission, recent member, and my section today is after the Restoration, what occurred in the 1960s. By the mid-1950s, Father Owens left All Saints to accept the position of director of St. James School, the school where he left to come to All Saints. He mentioned to a parishioner that he was a better teacher than a preacher. Following the reopening, life at All Saints returned to normal. But what if the congregation and community had not come together and saved All Saints? What was life like at All Saints during the 1960s and thereafter that would have been missed? Through the following years, the Guild became the Episcopal Church, women who continued to fundraise for the church and the community. A parish hall, and later an addition was built for a place to host congregational and community groups such as AA, Safe Nights, Vacation Bible Schools, daycare school, and kindergarten school. Many community projects to help others continue to be supported. They include ones such as Reading Camp, Project Echo, Heartfelt Backpack, and the church also supported children to attend summer camp at the Claggett Center. All Saints is a place for baptisms, weddings, and yes, for funerals. All Saints has provided a place of comfort and support to so many through the years that have lost loved ones. Another thing that I did before giving this presentation is I did some research on the county website to get an idea of what did this land look like back in the day. And there are actual aerial photography pictures on the county's GIS website that shows pictures of it back in the 1930s, 1950s, and more recently, really good high-def ones starting in 2004. I found it interesting because in 2004, there was no labyrinth. There was no Sputnik. It was just the church here. Then, as I got to 2006, I saw the start of the labyrinth, and then further on, I think 2008, 10, you start to see the makings of Sputnik, the garden, and then you see the whole labyrinth completed, and you see actually additions of the pathways around the labyrinth coming up to it. It's a really interesting thing to follow the progression. But again, what would have happened if there was no All Saints? It's wonderful, all the different things that you have here, that we have here, that going to the labyrinth, for example, to pray and to meditate. It's just fantastic. Now, you will view a video testimony from Martha Graham, who moved to Calvert County with her husband to the family farm in 1961. Her testimony includes what All Saints has meant to her and also remembrances of Father Owen. We will end our program with a popular Episcopal hymn sung many times at All Saints, Onward, Christian Soldiers. Thank you.
My name is Martha Graham Hyde, and I'm here with my husband, Thomas John Hyde. We're here visiting my mother, Martha Williams Graham. And today is Tuesday, July 6, 2021. We're here to interview my mom today because she's one of the last few remaining older members of All Saints Church. And so we're here today to ask her some questions about her memories of All Saints Church, in particular, her memories of Father Owens, and also anything she may have heard about the restoration that took place at All Saints Church in the 1950s. So, Mom, I guess the first question that I want to know is, what is your earliest memory of All Saints? When the first time you walked through the doors, when was that?
My earliest memory would be July 1954. We were married in January, Gordon and I, and we came up to the farm for a week for our honeymoon. So I went to church that Sunday in 1954 at All Saints.
What would you say is one of the fondest memories that stands out above all others when you were visiting All Saints, especially those early years? Anything stand out?
Everybody there was so welcoming. And I think it was because Gordon had been going up since he inherited the farm in 1950. So this was his 4th summer there. And of course they all knew him, and they just accepted me along with him. So it just was a very pleasant experience.
And back to your again memory of that summer your honeymoon, your delayed honeymoon that you came up. Where did you and Dad stay in Calvert County? There weren't any hotels, but where did you stay?
No, there were not any hotels. We stayed in Old Fields, which is a restaurant now. It was Betty Risco, was a boarding house. She would never have called it a boarding house. That was way beneath her. But it was a boarding house. Father Owens, who restored All Saints, was staying there. I got to know Father Owens quite well as a kind, wonderful man he was. And the meals were good. It was a lovely place to stay.
And also, some of the members also wanted you to share some of your memories going back again to All Saints of the summer suppers, and you've participated and worked at many summer suppers over the last 60 years. Can you describe what the early ones were like?
Absolutely. Verta Turner ran the summer suppers and a lot of other things at All Saints. When Verta died, 10 people had to replace what she did. Verta was a wonderful woman. And she had her crew in the kitchen frying crab cakes. We had a long serving on the side of the church with compartments for potato salad, coleslaw, crab cakes, and you got as many as you wanted. You just came by, and ham and fried chicken, and the men carried big trays of the things from the kitchen in the parish hall up to this holder, and then parishioners came by and got what they wanted. And on the tables, we had the sliced tomatoes, the beets, green beans, just about like it was the last year we did it recently. It has not changed that much, except we moved down to the parish hall, and now I have it, or the last one we had was there. And fortunately, when we had it outside, I can remember very, very few times we were rained out. God was looking over the summer supper, I'm sure, every year.
Yeah, and can you also talk about who came to our summer suppers back in those days?
Everybody in the county. The doctors, there were only 4 doctors at that time, but the doctors we went to, the county commissioners, everybody. It was a county-wide event, and a lot of this was because a lot of these people had contributed to the restoration of the church. So they had a personal involvement, and so All Saints Summer Supper was an annual event for Calvert County.
Can you also remember and name some of the families that when you first moved up in the 60s, or maybe when you were visiting in the 50s, some of the family and their names that were members of the church? And also, can you connect the dots to maybe some of their descendants that are either still members of All Saints or members still of the community?
There was Verta Turner, who I mentioned before. She really was an amazing woman and did so much for All Saints. And then there were the Dowells, and of course Brian Dowell and Chris still at All Saints, and Peggy and Billy, thank you. Peggy and Billy were 2 of the first people we met, and they were such wonderful people. They were lovely. They were absolutely kind, and it was a joy to be with them all the time. And there were the Kings, Jeanette and Robert. They were instrumental in the church and had been always. and the Armigers. The Armigers were very, very instrumental. I mean, she came down on her summer vacation until they moved here. This is a senior Armigers, and they moved here and built their house. And she was just, she was instrumental in the summer suppers and the running of All Saints. And the Blakes were prime members. Who I know I'm forgetting some, but those are the ones that stand out to me. The Cheneys, Evelyn and Bob there were families there who were so dedicated.
Parents, did you ever meet Tom's grandparents at that time?
I did meet Tom Hyde's grandmother.
Bourne.
Yes, I did meet. She was there. The Bournes and his grandfather also. The Bournes were there. I'm sorry. They should have been one of the first I remembered. Pardon me. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And some of those families, when you moved us up to the family farm in the early 60s, I remember many of them as well. Can you, again, back when you first moved up and you became involved, I'm sure, I know there was an ECW then and also an altar guild, but can you remember some of the charities maybe or projects back in that day that the church members donated to or worked on? Or
I can, in a later time, the first era of my experience at All Saints, we had so much money had gone into the restoration that we had not branched out yet. But the first charitable event or project that I really think we made a difference, we established the homeless center. All Saints was, 2 of our members were prime in doing that. And it was at where the Historical Society is now. It was at the Gray's house. And at that time, the county commissioners, everybody knew there were no homeless in Calvert County, so this was not a need. But All Saints parishioners knew it was a need. So when the originators, when they retired and moved, he asked me to take it over. So for, maybe 4 or 5 years, I shopped we did every Monday night, not just the first Monday of the month. We provided supper falls for the Echoes every Monday night, and I shopped, and on every Sunday morning I would go to the freezer and see what I had, leave out a note, leave out the things that were to be prepared Monday night. So we were instrumental in Echo, and we still are, and know its importance in our county and how it has helped the people in our county who need help so much. And this is All Saints.
That's a wonderful story, Mom. Now, on to the restoration itself in the late 1940s, early 50s. I guess I want to start with, and you already mentioned that you had the privilege of meeting and knowing Father John Owens. Do you remember the first time you met him? And can you describe him? I've had quite a few people describe him to me, and it's interesting. So many, there's a thread through all their descriptions. It's the same person that they see. So tell me if you remember, and then describe him.
Well, I can't remember if I met him at dinner at Old Fields where we were staying, and he was also had a room there also, or it may have been when he was cutting the grass at All Saints. He cut the grass. He cut the grass as well as doing the sacraments. He had communion every morning at All Saints, and you were welcome. If you wanted to come, of course you were welcome to his communion. That's where he had his communion. And then he might go out and cut the weeds or cut the grass or visit people or beg for money to restore All Saints. So Father Owens was just a man of all seasons. He just was, he was something for everybody. He was something for everybody, and he would listen, and he was very kind, and he was so knowledgeable. He had been in the service, so his stories were exceptional. He was so interesting as a dinner partner, or anytime you were with him. It was a pure pleasure.
And again, one of those threads that I've heard when people describe him is that, physically he was very powerful. He was tall, and his presence was just, when he entered a room, you would want to know, who is he? He just had a big
He lit
physical
up a room
presence.
and brought the light in with him. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you were interested. When you looked at him, you wanted to know who he was and his story. And his story was just as interesting as seeing him the first time.
That's what I've heard from so many people. The next couple questions I'm going to ask you is it's kind of what you heard secondhand about the restoration. And I know that you knew you got to know these families when you first moved up in the 60s, and I know that you had the opportunity for them to share with you what they had done and been through for the restoration. So the questions I'm going to ask next are, do you remember what you heard?
Okay.
So, do you remember what you heard about the reason the bishop was deciding at that time to close All Saints?
Okay, I'll start it again with a family story. My son-in-law's mother, my daughter's in-laws, we were great friends before they were a pair, before my daughter and son-in-law were a couple. And I remember Emily telling me, Emily Bourne Hyde, that when she got married, one of the people, their foot went through the floor of the church. She, of course, got married at All Saints because that was the Bourne's church. But the church was in really, really bad shape. And a priest came down once a month to give whoever was there communion, and the number got fewer and fewer, and the priest would stay with Peggy and Billy Dow. Whoever the priest was, he'd spend Saturday night there, have communion at All Saints, and then there would not be any communion at All Saints for another month. So it got to the point where the bishop said All Saints is no longer viable. And he sent Father Owens down to close All Saints, and Father Owens came down to do that. He had no idea he wouldn't do it, because he always did what the bishop instructed him to. And then when he saw All Saints and he saw the people around All Saints, he said, I could not close this church. So he pleaded with the bishop, because the bishop had made up his mind. He pleaded with the bishop and he said, we can do it. And they did it. They did it. And it took the parishioners of All Saints then. It took the community. It took so many people who were not All Saints parishioners. And a lot of the financing came from burdens of tobacco. The farmers would pledge to All Saints so many burdens of tobacco each year. And that's how our saints got restored. And if not for those farmers and Father Owens and the community, a lot of the Dr. Ward in the community, a lot of the community people who weren't All Saints parishioners, they all got together and they preserved All Saints for us. Otherwise, I would not be going to All Saints today, and it would be a real sorrow. It would be a sorrow for me to have missed the experience of All Saints, the loving experience of All Saints that I appreciate this today and every day.
Yeah, and that was, you've answered a couple questions, and again, why do you think Father Owens decided to try so hard to keep the church open and try to get the funds to restore it? And you answered that, and that's what I had heard too. He fell in love with the community, and I don't think the bishop counted on that. He was single, and usually, especially if you have a family, you tend to connect a little quicker and easier with the community.
Well said.
But he was, and I don't think the bishop, I didn't think he would count on him falling in love with the community and the people. And I also think the bishop didn't count on him staying in a boarding house that was the social hub of the whole county. And
it was.
Maybe you heard a story maybe from my dad, when my dad literally broke bread with Father Owens at the dinner table there, that he would meet people from up and down the county and ask for them to give money for the restoration.
He did, from one end of this 30-mile county to the other. And he got money from them. He did. It was, I think it was the love of Father Owen's life. Absolutely. And he stayed connected with the people at All Saints all those years after he left. And we loved him.
Yeah.
We loved him.
And I guess, can you describe some of the restoration of the church that you heard had been done?
Well, they
we
didn't
know
have
the
to do it
floors.
all. They had to re-brick it, or the facings to the bricks. They, of course, the flooring. They put in heating, and they put in there. I don't know if everyone knows there are heat coils under those bricks now, but I don't think that ever really worked. But a lot of thought went into it. So they just restored one into the other. They had a new altar, which actually did not really fit in All Saints. It was too large. It just wasn't. But some of the, I think we had one person who gave a lot of money and he wanted it. So it was put there. And then a few years, I can't remember how many, I lose track of time, the original altar was put back. Mary Jane and Walt Hittinger sanded it and refinished it, and it was put back, and it's the altar that should be in All Saints. It's so beautiful now. It is the altar that should be there. But everything was done. And of course, there was no choir room. There was no, at the back when you came into the right, there was a curtained off area. That was where the priest got changed. That was our,
Yeah.
that was
Sacristy.
Thank you. That was a sacristy. So the sacristy was added in the early 80s. In memory of our son, Malcolm Gordon Graham III. So the sacristy was added. And then several years later, the choir room was added. And of course, everybody knows Deb Watson, who's been our choir director for so long and done such an admirable job. And we added the choir room, and Gordon Graham, my husband, was instrumental in contacting all the Grahams who were still alive and asking them to donate money for the choir room. So that's why we have a choir room there. But it was almost redone, the All Saints, except for the bricks, the outside. Except the baptismal font is original to the church. So that's a treasure. That's something that was not changed or replaced or ever lost. I would like to say my happiest and my saddest occasions have been at All Saints. Two of my three children were married at All Saints, and those were both glorious days. I can't tell you how beautiful All Saints looked and how beautiful they were and what joyous occasions they were. And two of my children have had funerals at All Saints. One way back in 71 and one just recently. So, and my oldest was baptized at All Saints when he was 6 months old. That was my second visit to All Saints. And Gordy was baptized there. My sons were acolytes there. Unfortunately, women couldn't be acolytes then, so my daughter was not. But my sons were acolytes. We were, as a family, I was in the choir. We were, as a family, Gordon taught Sunday school. So we have lived through All Saints all these years. It's been a big part of our lives, maybe the biggest part in the county. It's been our social life, our devotional life. We love the people there. People have come and gone, but the quality stays. The people there are marvelous people. They really are. So I would invite anyone to All Saints who wants to enlarge their devotional family. You'll find nothing but good, loving people there now.
And I totally agree with that, Mom. And it All Saints has been our foundation of everything, of not just church and Sunday, but throughout our life. It's been our foundation. So I agree with all of that. So, Mom, thank you so much for taking the time to just
My
share
pleasure.
so many of your important memories, and just so happy that you were willing to share it with so many others. So thank you, Mom.
I enjoyed it.
Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ the royal master leads against the foe, forward into battle, see his banner go. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Like a mighty army moves the Church of God. Brothers, we are treading where the saints have trod. We are not divided, oh, one body we, one in hope and doctrine, one in charity. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Onward, then, ye people, join our happy throng. Lend with ours your voices in the triumph song. Glory, Lord, and honor unto Christ the King. This through countless ages men and angels sing. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before.
Thank you for taking the time to join in and view our program today about the 1950s All Saints Parish restoration. We hope you enjoyed our program and, even more importantly, learned more about a time past so important to our church's history. We'd like to end our program by telling you more about what Father John Owens did with the rest of his life following his return from All Saints to St. James Episcopal School. As he told a parishioner before leaving All Saints, "I'm a better teacher than preacher," and he was. He spent most of his career, including many years after leaving All Saints, at St. James School as director. He went on to live a very long life, passing away in 2013. And you can find his eulogy and obituary online. His eulogy, given by the Reverend Dr. D. Dunnan, a director of St. James School following Father Owens, said that even after retiring from St. James, Father Owens never stopped being the headmaster of the school. He just stopped running it. He still celebrated his students' marriages, baptized their children, and corresponded with them, and prayed for them every day. Also in his eulogy, Reverend Dunnan described a meeting he had with Father Owens after Reverend Dunnan became the new headmaster. Reverend Dunnan proceeded to tell him all of the problems and challenges he faced as headmaster. His list was a long one, and he said that Father Owens listened patiently, bought him lunch, and said he completely understood, although he had been retired for 8 years. Reverend Dunn then asked if Father Owens had any advice for him. And this was Father Owens' response. When you make a decision, don't worry if it's popular or not. Just worry if it's right or wrong. I think those are very good words for all of us for today as well. One more event in Father Owens' story, perhaps the best happy ending, was when he passed away in 2013. He left in his will a generous amount to All Saints Church. Included with the check was a note from the trustee saying All Saints was Father Owens' first and only parish. He loved his tenure there and became lifelong friends of many in the congregation.